I never thought of you as my mother. You just wanted to hog all of Dad's inheritance for yourself." In the midst of her wedding reception, my daughter suddenly shouted this at me. The room buzzed with whispers, and all eyes turned to me in an instant. Everyone looked confused about what was happening, but I was the most bewildered of all. Here I was at my beloved daughter's wedding, determined to proudly witness her special day for both myself and her late father. Then suddenly, this outburst. What does she mean by me hogging the inheritance? And why bring this up now, on your once-in-a-lifetime big day? My mind was filled with questions. But my daughter, now completely overcome with anger, continued to hurl insults and accusations at me, eventually kicking me out of the venue. As I left, I offered her one last piece of advice as a parent. Whatever happens, live strong. She'll understand the meaning of those words someday. I'm Karen. I'm a stay-at-home mom, living with my husband, his daughter from a previous marriage, and our son. I met my husband over 20 years ago. At work, where we fell in love. Karen, that presentation was amazing. Thank you. I wasn't very confident, but it's nice to hear you say that. We encouraged and supported each other as colleagues, and our relationship blossomed into romance. My husband, recently divorced, was raising his baby daughter on his own. Looking back, it must have been a tough time for him, both physically and emotionally, but he never showed it. He was always smiling, kind, and a great support as a coworker. About a year after we started working together, he said to me over dinner at a restaurant, "You know, I'm actually thinking of starting my own business. There are a few companies that have expressed interest in working with me." Wow, that's incredible. You're so talented. I'm totally behind you. Thanks. So, this might be a bit much to ask, but if it's possible. What's up? I'm gonna make this company a success, I promise you. I won't let us go through any unnecessary hardship. But, I need a little support. I want to be there for you, Karen, not just at work but in our personal lives too. Oh, what do you mean by that? I will make you happy, I swear. Will you marry me? I know it's a lot to ask. That's how he proposed to me. I was surprised. But I didn't hesitate. I'd be honored. Without any doubt, that's how I responded. And so, we got married. Our wedding was small, but we enjoyed it with our family and friends. Everyone congratulated us with smiles, and it's a day I remember like it was yesterday. It was a truly beautiful ceremony that I'll always cherish. That's how our married life started. It was more challenging than I had braced myself for. After all, I became a mother overnight. His daughter became my daughter. Raising a child for the first time was really tough. She cried a lot, and so did I. But I decided not to yell or rush, just to watch over her patiently. I took it one step at a time, learning along the way. I somehow managed to raise her that way. She was adorable. Her round eyes, chubby cheeks, high-pitched voice. Her smile as she grew older, the way she ran to me, calling me mom, all of it was just so precious. I had been anxious about suddenly becoming a mother before we married. I worried about whether I could love his child. But those worries were unnecessary. In fact, I was too busy to even think about them. My husband, too, was swamped after starting his business. Despite having people willing to work and collaborate with him, being a new CEO was tough. There were so many firsts for him, and he was always running around, confused. I remember him apologizing on the phone for almost 10 minutes straight once. I helped with organizing paperwork and such, but I know it was really hard for him. Still, he found time to take care of our daughter and show concern for me. He was a great father and husband. 3 years flew by in a blink. His business finally started to stabilize. It had grown quite a bit from the beginning. His promise of not letting us suffer was finally becoming a reality. And then, our son was born. He was a younger brother to our daughter. Even after he was born, I tried my best to treat both my daughter and son equally. Blood didn't matter. They were both my precious children. My daughter doted on her younger brother. She played with him and was a great big sister. He was really attached to her. Watching them together was heartwarming. Like any family, we had our small troubles. But I think we managed to live quite peacefully and happily. Time passed quickly, and before I knew it, my daughter was 26 and my son was 22. Then, suddenly, something terrible happened. I was relaxing at home one day when I got a phone call. Hello? Oh, what? It was unbelievable news. I didn't want to believe it, but my husband had collapsed at work. He was rushed to the hospital, but despite the doctor's best efforts, he didn't make it. It was a stroke. He had been fine until the day before. Everything was normal. It was such a sudden and unexpected goodbye. You! Why, how could this happen? As I looked at my husband's face lying in the coffin, he seemed peaceful, showing no sign of the pain he must have felt. It looked like he was just sleeping, which made it all the more heartbreaking. I couldn't even say goodbye, and the pain was so great that I couldn't cry. Still, somehow, I managed to pull myself together and handled the funeral arrangements. Our son, who always tried to act tough, clearly loved his father dearly. The image of him, head bowed and tears flowing, is still vivid in my memory. But there was something off about my daughter. It's normal to be upset at your father's death, but this felt different. She didn't shed a tear or speak a word to me. She would help with funeral preparations if asked, but something was just not right. At that time, I was too overwhelmed and interpreted her behavior as her own way of expressing grief. Despite everything, I managed to say my farewells to my husband in my own way. Gradually, I started going back to work and returning to normal life. A few months later, my daughter's wedding took place. After graduating from college, she had started living with her boyfriend without getting a job, essentially becoming a housewife. Now, she is finally getting married. The wedding, planned before my husband passed away, was something he had looked forward to, especially walking down the aisle with our daughter. My husband was determined to watch our daughter's wedding without shedding a tear. He was really psyched up about it. I remember how we joked about it, saying things like, "That's still a long way off," as if it was just yesterday. Thinking about it almost made me feel down again. I couldn't let myself look sad at my beloved daughter's wedding. Carrying a photo of my husband, I dressed up for the first time in a long while, along with my son, who was also dressed up, and we attended the wedding. When we left home that morning, I looked up at the sky and said, "You're watching from up there, aren't you?" and headed to the wedding with a smile. I intended to wholeheartedly celebrate my daughter and her husband at that moment. The wedding was held in a grand and lively venue. The food was delicious, and all the guests seemed very happy. My daughter's husband was a classmate she met in a club during college. They had been dating for about 3 years, a fact I was aware of. However, since she had never brought him home or talked much about him, I was a bit surprised when the wedding plans were announced. I had my doubts about him, but his promise to make my daughter happy was convincing enough for me to believe in him. He was smiling happily at the front of the venue. Above all, my daughter, in her stunningly beautiful white wedding dress, looked indescribably gorgeous. I thought of how much my husband would have wanted to see her like this, and tears welled up in my eyes again. I had been crying from the beginning of the day. So, when the time came for the family message and she shouted, "This woman hogged all of my father's inheritance," I was in disbelief. It took me a moment to realize those harsh words were directed at me. I was so overwhelmed by the sudden shift from joy to shock that I couldn't understand what was happening. Why had things turned out like this? I thought my relationship with my daughter had been normal, like any parent and child. She became rebellious during her teenage years, but I thought that was typical for that age. Looking back, I realized that she started distancing herself from me around the time she began dating her future husband in college. But I thought that was just her growing up, and I was happy for her. Since her father wasn't there, I walked the aisle with her. Even then, she seemed unsatisfied, as if she had something to say. I assumed she was just disappointed that her father couldn't be there. Was all this actually stemming from some deep-seated resentment towards me? I never thought I was a perfect mother, but I never imagined my daughter would say such things at her wedding. Why bring up the inheritance out of the blue? Even after that, my daughter, her face red with anger, kept hurling accusations at me. "Dad loved me the most, more than you and my brother. He despised your greedy nature." He never said it out loud, but I knew it. My daughter spat out these words rapidly, not giving me a chance to respond, and continued to shower me with insults and accusations. She claimed that, while I doted on my biological son, I never showed her the same affection and that she had been discriminated against. She said she lived a miserable life from a young age, barely getting any allowance and unable to do what she wanted. Moreover, she accused me of being a cruel woman for not crying at my husband's funeral, and suggested that it was my fault that he had a stroke because I didn't pay attention to his diet. Finally, she even called me an evil person, not a mother at all. My daughter was playing the victim. I couldn't believe the barrage of hurtful words thrown at me. I could see the shocked expression on my son's face at the same table. Her claims were baseless, and I wanted to argue back against the delusions she was expressing, but the content didn't matter to me anymore. I was just immensely shocked that my daughter thought of me this way. Next to her, I saw her husband nodding tearfully in agreement with everything she said. I could also see my husband's smiling face in a photograph. Whispers from the guests inadvertently reached my ears. They were all looking at me. I could hear words of sympathy for my daughter, and, at the same time, words of blame directed at me. But there were also voices saying they couldn't believe I would do such things, wondering what had gotten into my daughter. The staff of the venue, disturbed by the sudden commotion, rushed over to try to stop my daughter and calm the guests. The atmosphere of celebration had completely disappeared. Watching my daughter show such hostility towards me, I wondered if she really was the daughter I had raised. Was this some kind of prank? No, such an unpleasant prank couldn't exist. Then it must be reality. Was my daughter misunderstanding something? Or had she been brainwashed? These desperate thoughts crossed my mind, but when I saw my daughter relishing in my sorrow, I knew something had ended inside me. Finally, she marched up to me from the main table, pointed her finger at me, and loudly declared she was cutting ties with me. I had no energy left to argue back. I felt drained, wondering what all the days of treating her as family had been for. I decided to say one last thing to her as a parent. Understood. Whatever happens, keep going strong. With a triumphant look, my daughter turned her back on me, and I walked away alone, heavy-hearted. Soon, I heard footsteps hurrying after me. It was my son. Mom, is it okay? Just letting sis say all that? As far as I've seen, neither you nor Dad ever treated us differently. My usually gentle son was unusually angry. Yes, I know. Honestly, it was quite a shock. But it's her choice, so we have to accept it. But this is just... My son, overwhelmed with anger, seemed on the verge of tears. It's okay. We should respect her wishes. She has her life, and we have ours. Comforting my son, we headed home together. Today's events were a hard pill to swallow, but I had things I needed to do, given the situation. I had to let my daughter know the reality of things. Just a few days after the declaration of disownment. It happened early one morning. I was awakened by the incessant ringing of the doorbell. The sound was annoying, but I checked the monitor. As expected, it showed who I thought it would. As soon as I opened the door, my daughter burst in, frantic. Mom! What's going on? My husband lost his job. He was working so hard, why? My daughter, yelling in the doorway without even a morning greeting, appeared to have rushed over without even putting on makeup. You didn't know, did you? Know what? Let me explain everything. Out of a final act of kindness, I decided to tell my daughter everything. Her husband had been working at the company my husband and I ran since they were dating. He met my daughter in a college club and joined our company as a part-time worker through her recommendation. After graduating, he continued working as a contract employee. How's your daughter's boyfriend doing at work? Well, honestly, he's struggling a bit. We've tried different coaching methods, but... My daughter's husband was utterly incompetent at his job. Looking back, my husband and I might have been too lenient, but he was our daughter's boyfriend, so we gave him special attention. Especially my husband, who seriously considered how to make him more efficient at work and even tried to improve the training methods for him. However, no matter what, my daughter's husband just couldn't produce results. Worse, his work attitude was poor. He showed no respect to my husband, the president of the company. He was often late and would click his tongue in disapproval if something didn't suit him. Still, my husband believed in him, saying, "He's the man our daughter chose, so surely," and continued to support them both wholeheartedly. Honestly, I was increasingly frustrated with my daughter's husband, who showed no intention of meeting my husband's expectations. But I held my tongue, respecting my husband's wishes. Then, my husband passed away. Our company was run with my husband as the president and me as the vice president. We both had a complete understanding of each other's job roles, so there were no issues in taking over after his death. A few days after the funeral, I was officially appointed as the president with the board's approval. Given my daughter's husband's persistent poor work attitude and her unilateral declaration of cutting ties, there was no longer any reason to keep employing him. There were already complaints from other employees. I decided to fire him.
No, that's a lie.
My daughter screamed in disbelief.
He always said everything was going great at work, that he had the support of his superiors and subordinates, and that he might even get a fast promotion. I was counting on him.
Although I knew it, this confirmed that my daughter's husband was just that sort of man. My daughter was completely deceived by him, and I was astounded by her naivety. She continued, confessing that she thought her husband was competent and could survive in the company without my help, that he would earn a high salary, so even if she cut ties with me, he could still stay at the company. That's why she declared her disownment. I listened in silence, dumbfounded by her audacity. Having lived with her for years, I felt stupid for not seeing through her, but she clearly didn't understand the kind of person I was. She really underestimated me. I was not just my husband's wife, I was a co-owner and executive of that company. Did she not even consider that? After venting her anger, my daughter's expression changed to one of pleading.
Hey, let's forget about the disownment. You don't want to lose your dear daughter, right? So, can you reconsider firing my husband?
I couldn't help but let out a dry laugh at her sudden change of heart. My dear daughter? Weren't you the one who accused me of being a terrible parent in front of everyone just a few days ago? I reiterated that I couldn't reverse the decision to fire her husband. His position had already been filled by someone else, as my son, who was about to graduate from a top university, had insisted on joining our company even after turning down offers from major corporations. "Mom, I want to support you. I'll work hard, please let me join," he had said. So, I decided to fill the vacant position with him. At this, my daughter accused me again, claiming I favored my real child over her and that I didn't love her. I calmly replied, "This isn't about favoritism, it's about business. Between someone who showed enthusiasm to work here despite other offers and someone who never utilized the chances given, the choice is clear for a business owner." Just then, my son walked in, yawning, having heard the commotion.
Hey, you're on my side, right? Help me convince Mom to take back the decision about my husband's job.
My daughter desperately pleaded with her brother. But his reaction was not what she expected. "Who are you? You're no longer a child of this family, right? A stranger like you should leave, this is trespassing." Upon recognizing my daughter, my son's expression changed instantly. The sleepiness in his eyes vanished, replaced by a cold stare directed at her. "What, after all, I played with you when we were kids, didn't I?" she said. "That's all in the past, isn't it? What are you doing now?" he retorted. My daughter seemed stunned for a moment, perhaps expecting her brother to take her side. However, as we remained silent, she eventually realized this was no longer her place. With a resigned look, she trudged out of the house. "Are you okay with this?" "She's disowned me, but she's still your sister," I asked him. When I asked him that, my son replied clearly. "What are you talking about? She's not my sister. I don't want a family who treats you like a convenient tool," he replied firmly. I felt a bit relieved to hear my son speak so clearly. Later, he inquired about what happened to my daughter and her husband. He thought I might be worried about her and asked around. According to what he heard, my daughter's husband initially approached her because her parents were company executives. Marrying her meant having a father-in-law as the company president. Even if he was incompetent or had a bad attitude, he believed a certain status and salary would be guaranteed, and he might even become the president himself someday. Such naivety. In a corporate structure, such nepotism doesn't work. But that's what he believed. When he suddenly got fired, it led to a huge fight with my daughter.
It's all your fault for disowning your mother that I got fired. What? It's your fault for being brainless. You're just a leech living off your parents. What did you say?
They engaged in a nasty blame game. Eventually, my daughter's husband decided she was of no use to him, declaring he never loved her, and left a signed divorce paper before disappearing. My daughter, perhaps still holding on to hope, searched for him extensively but hasn't found him yet. Whether they could reconcile even if they did meet is doubtful. Apparently, there were sightings of my daughter's husband in a busy area in front of a train station in another state. He was seen trying to pick up a woman carrying a designer bag and failing miserably. He was wearing ragged clothes and didn't look like he was living an easy life. The commotion at the wedding, whether true or not, seemed to be enough to alienate her friends, leaving her with no one to rely on after being abandoned by her husband. Now completely alone, she had to continue her daily life. Finding herself at a dead end, she had to take on her very first part-time job. It was the same kind of supermarket job she had once looked down upon as menial. However, having never worked before, she was naive about the ways of the world. She struggled, bullied by the senior staff for her lack of skills and poor work ethic. Her life wasn't easy, and she couldn't even enjoy her beloved fashion anymore. While complaining about everything, she was being toughened up by the harsh realities of society. As I told her at the wedding, I hope she continues to strive, no matter what. She's still young and has the potential to change her life with her own efforts. As for me, after my husband's passing, I reorganized some parts of our business and started a new venture. Something my husband had always wanted to do. I hope to eventually pass this business on to my son, who's still a new employee. Not showing him any favoritism, he's working as hard as any other staff member. I'm committed to growing the company my husband and I started, as a way of making up for not being able to build a good relationship with my daughter.